Here today. My name's David Brown, and I'm the interim CEO of Cooley Dickinson Hospital, as well as the chair of emergency medicine at Mass General Hospital in Boston. I'm a longtime Cooley board member, and I grew up here in the Valley. Actually, I have 3 generations of family still living here, and I'm enjoying reconnecting with them during my time here. I'm honored to kick off today's ceremony, which marks the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic and honors the work that all of you did to support our community during this past year. Today's a day of remembrance and reflection for us all. It's been a year since the WHO declared COVID-19 a worldwide pandemic, a year since the U.S. declared COVID-19 a national disaster, a year marked by the death of 545,000 Americans and countless more around the world. A year marked by economic and social hardship, by disruptions at work, education, and in the everyday human interactions that we all treasure. A year filled with fear and frustration, heartache and despair, but also extraordinary courage, commitment, and compassion. A year filled with emotional and physical fatigue. A year since we, all of you, started taking care of our friends and neighbors and ourselves in what will always be probably the most important and defining event of our careers. For me personally, it's been a year since I moved out of my family's home and lived alone for 15 weeks in an effort to protect my family from an infection I thought I was certain to contract in the emergency department. A year since I felt the flash of fear intubating my first patient with COVID-19, a fear that would take months to recede. I spent most of the past year at Mass General, as I said, but I've been, as I said, a Cooley board member, and so I was able to see and hear and feel the amazing response of our teams here at Cooley at every level of the organization to serve our community at its time of greatest need. I am so proud and grateful to be part of that community now, and so proud and grateful for all you've done for our patients and for each other. At a time when our community really needed us, each of you stepped forward, and I'm just in awe of what all of you have accomplished. And now, with 3 effective and safe vaccines going into shoulders as fast as they can be produced and distributed, I feel optimistic about the future. I now allow myself to look ahead to a time when we can safely hug our loved ones and see each other's smiles at work unmasked. Meanwhile, I continue to be inspired every day by each of you, by your courage, your grace, your compassion, your commitment, and your humanity. And as your colleague here at Cooley, I salute and thank you all. So I'm going to turn it over to our CNO, Angela Belmont, to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, and thank all of you for being here today. It means so much to see everyone outside of a computer, right? So it is with great honor and privilege that I introduce to you Evelyn Snyder. Evelyn was a patient in the ICU here who had COVID, who was here for over 30 days with us, had experienced every cycle of COVID, the ups, the downs, the ventilator, being extubated. She's absolutely amazing, and it is such a privilege today to be able to have her here with us, to have her share her story about the wonderful care that she received here at Cooley Dickinson. Evelyn?
Okay, well, I'll do my best. Thank you for including me in this day of remembrance. What a year. Before being asked to join you, I have been reliving my COVID-19 experience, both in and out of the hospital. And despite being intubated for nearly 2 weeks of my 30-day stay, my memories, including a few drug-induced dreams, are rich and come to light often. The initial return home was the most difficult, in part because I was cut off from you, my caregivers, who provided me with comfort, kindness, and care, advocacy for my wishes, edible treats, and life-saving treatment. Best of all was the personal connection that you offered generously with intimate stories of family, work, and being on the front line of COVID. I most regret not having registered everyone's name. Your faith in me was a significant contributor to my eventual healing. As well, your compassionate care that filled in his family was the difference maker. There was some lowlights, I must admit, all part of my story, but highlights as well. A nurse sitting on my bed, not afraid to come close and extending much-needed affection. A steady stream of ice chips, setting up a surprise visit in the healing garden with my son, hearing good news. There were countless friendly interactions of people coming into my room and offering their support while tidying up, picking up a tray, my physical therapist spending more time than he had working with my son to get Audible on my phone. It was a bit of a shock when I was apparently well enough to leave critical care. The comfortable bed aside, and it being in the middle of the night, I was not pleased nor feeling all that secure. But it did mark the beginning of my healing process and regaining the independence that I had lost. It started with breathing, drinking, eating, catching up with family and friends, listening to books on tape, and trying to take a step or two while plotting vehemently to leave the hospital. Responding to my wishes once again, the hospital staff readied me for a quick return home. I was thrilled to have a nurse, fondly remembered from critical care, assist me on my final day, removing lines of all sorts and helping me dress. No canvas tarp with pockets for gadgetry. And then wheeling me through the door to a line of smiling faces as I left the hospital. These acts of endorsement were so powerful and invaluable to the recovery process. After returning home and beginning the long process of healing, I had no idea how sick I was. I missed you terribly. I realized that never before had I experienced a health crisis without follow-up care from my healthcare team. Then the right person at the right moment appeared, a bridge from post-COVID care to my team at CDH, who let me know how you were all faring while also offering me a path forward. How I have worried about you continuing on the front line and facing down the health crisis every day with patients. What I want to leave you with is that your care was personalized and of the highest quality, and that you are appreciated, remembered, and thought about often. I sing your praises loudly, though not well, and want for your well-being as you care for so many others. How many thank yous is enough to meet this moment? As my 2.5-year-old granddaughter says of her love for her family, into infinity. Thank you for all that you do. You are my heroes. It is wonderful to be here and to be alive. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tombira Zaman, and she is one of our intensivists in the ICU to tell her stories and thoughts during COVID.
I might cry after that one. Thank you so much, Ms. Schneider. And thank you for asking me to share my story. My grandfather was a surgeon who died in the Bangladeshi Liberation War in 1971. When the city that they lived in became a war zone, all the other doctors and nurses fled to the safety of the countryside. And only my grandfather, one anesthesiologist, one nurse, and an ambulance driver remained to take care of the sick and wounded. And they were killed when soldiers infiltrated the hospital. And that was my family legacy I grew up with my whole life. And so when this COVID-19 pandemic came along, I thought, well, now it's my turn to face personal danger for the greater good of caring for my community as a physician. But unlike my grandfather, I was not alone. I had all of you. I had Joanne Levin tirelessly working with the infection control team. I had my partners, Dave Serlin, working with respiratory therapy, procure extra vents and equipment, and Charles Dumont combing through whatever data we have with Eric Granowitz to find the best treatment guidelines. We had our frequent moonlighter, Dr. Arapali, who, with his calm and quiet leadership, gave us, the whole ICU team confidence that we can do this, and we miss him. We now have Dr. Lipkin-Moore and Dr. Mortaletti helping us. We have our ICU advanced practice clinicians who were just as frightened as the rest of us that we were going to bring home this bug, just as you said, to our kids, but came anyway with their best foot forward, as they always do, and while at the same time navigating this remote learning that we're all trying to do for our children. And of course, we had our incredible, dedicated ICU nurses and staff who went from proning vented patients 2 or 3 times a year to 2 or 3 times a day. And we had the environmental services team who would make it a point of sanitizing not only the patients' rooms and the hallways, but they would come into our office and clean our office like to take care of us. This is not normal protocol before all of this happened. We had the maintenance crew working and changing all of our rooms into negative pressure rooms and other things. We had the x-ray techs that kept going in for frequent x-rays when we were using those to decide who to intubate. We had pharmacy making frequent contact, making sure we had all the necessary drips and meds. The lab figuring out all the equipment and processes we needed for the COVID tests and the antibody testing and everything. Food services and nutrition showed up and kept us all nourished, keep us going. The other physicians in the hospital, we had the amazing hospitalist team and the med-surg nurses who began taking care of patients far sicker than they were used to because we were full of vented patients and doing an incredible job. We had our anesthesiologist colleagues with us for a while, and of course the ED crew downstairs. We had the PCPs and the physical therapists and occupational therapists and VNA taking the baton when our patients were discharged. And very importantly, we had our senior team behind us, everyone, especially Dr. Garcia. Oh my goodness. We were working hard to make sure we had the resources we needed to take care of our patients and to get us vaccinated when the time came. So it has been a hard year. I mean, really in the beginning, with all the unknowns, whether we would be overwhelmed with patients, whether our PPE would keep us safe, it was very scary. I was scared, even though I didn't let on. And as we became more comfortable with all the donning and the doffing, I think then we allowed ourselves to start feeling more sadness for our patients. And when it came kind of like a tsunami. I remember months and months of sadness in the ICU, but maybe it was only 2 months. I remember the morning huddles in the ICU having a very somber feeling when day after day the same patients barely made any progress, often had complications, after being sick for several weeks with no visitors, ultimately succumbing after it all. It was touching when the nurses would decorate the windows so the families could identify their room and come outside the hospital and kind of send their good wishes, since that's the best that they could do. During the second surge, the patients were not intubated as much, but were just as sick on high-flow oxygen. And it was harder then because they weren't paralyzed and sedated. They were awake and knew what was happening. They were often sad and very much afraid, and it was hard to reassure them. We got to know them, and if they couldn't talk, then we got to know them through long conversations with their families who couldn't see them until their last moments, but always shared what was so special about their loved one. Nowadays, we have a COVID patient here and there, along with our DKA and our duodenal ulcers, but is this the new normal? I certainly hope not. We've lost so many patients this year, and it has been hard, but many have also survived, like Ms. Schneider, who is so inspiring to me. And there are so many others who are working hard to get back to baseline and appreciate this chance to live. I get to see them every now and again in my office, and I feel a sense of satisfaction. But the credit belongs to all of us, not just me, all of you. And I always tell them that. I hope that when my grandchildren learn about their grandmother in this historic time, they will understand that in our city, in our community, the healthcare team didn't run away, but came together. And we helped some people survive, and the others, we tried to ease their suffering on their way out. And in the meanwhile, we propped each other up and cried a little, and eventually made it through a pandemic together. Thank you.
Amanda Dixon, one of our critical care nurses.
My eyeglasses fog up. Stand back, girls. A year of COVID-19 in the ICU. In memory of Tom, Fred, Patrick, Alan, Michael, Carmen, Joe, and many more. Weeks of hard work and dedicated care could not save them. They did not make it, and we will never forget them. In the last few weeks of their lives, we were their family and caregivers. There was no one else. We shared their pain. We were at the bedside with them day and night, trying everything we could to help them, and it was devastating when they died. They were also alone and behind closed doors for long periods of time, until the last few days or hours when their families were finally allowed in to be with them. For those who had no one, we made sure one of the nurses stayed with them until the end. For many of us, the memories are stark. The vision of a wife, her husband lying still on a ventilator laden with tubes, who found a spot at the head of the bed where she put her face next to his and wept into her mask. Some couldn't risk it and stayed out in the cold parking lot, sometimes for hours, looking up at the window with the pink hearts so they could wave or say goodbye. Sometimes we broke the rules. We couldn't help it. Hugging a bereft wife or holding someone's hand, human nature winning over science and protocol. The effects of this last year are still surfacing. We cope as part of our job, but the weight seems heavier than usual. The impact of witnessing family separation when they need to be together like no other time is profound, and we have felt their sadness and frustration. We all have our stories to tell. One nurse went home after her patient was sedated and intubated, a final attempt to save his life. With a heavy heart, she shared her story with her husband that night. She was the last person to talk to him before he passed away, and it did not feel right. In the next room, another patient was slowly deteriorating. It seemed like he could survive. He had been active and healthy with no major health issues. Every day we encouraged him to keep going, told him people were surviving and going home. He looked straight at me and said, "Do you mean that? You're not just saying that?" I will never forget the way he looked at me, desperately seeking reassurance, clinging on to hope, trying so hard even though he knew he was dying. Coming back to work a few days later and seeing the room empty, my heart sank. He did not survive. Even when we are used to losing patients, this was a hard one. It caught me off guard. We couldn't do anything to stop it. It was soul-destroying. I have not witnessed anything like this suffering in decades of nursing. At one point, there were several weeks in a row where we were losing patients nearly every day, sometimes more than one or two. It felt like death was closing in on us and we were losing control. And this is the burden we carry with us. We lost so many, and the air felt dark and heavy, feeling helpless to this ugly virus. Then emerged another dimension to loss, guilt. As the weeks turned into months with confusing messages from the media and our leaders, families were getting together. For many, it felt risky and confusing and anxiety-provoking, but it became too difficult to isolate any longer. Some remained strong and steadfast, others could not. The guilt, in addition to the grief that someone in the family had exposed their loved one, who then ended up suffering and dying, was unbearable to watch. Disbelief that kissing your grandchild could end this way. We have learned not to be judgmental. As the weeks turned to months, there was a sense of normality living with the virus, like a cloud over us, ever present and unrelenting. Approaching the dark days of winter, the atmosphere was changing. People were getting tired. We were still wearing masks for many long hours and going from room to room, constantly dressing up and dressing down with our protective gear and not seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. There were signs of hostility, anger, and burnout. Heroism was no longer a common word heard or seen on posters in the hallway. The second wave produced no extra staff, cutbacks were in place, and there seemed an expectation to keep going without complaint. Financial reality setting in, the cold, hard facts of the pandemic, and it brought with it fatigue and weariness. The care of our patients had also changed with different medications and practice. We were using high-flow oxygen and self-proning. In some ways, it was easier for the nurses, but the patients' suffering seemed more intense. 24 hours a day of high-pressure oxygen loudly blowing up their sore noses. They were awake and terrified. Instead of sleeping through the end of their lives sedated on a ventilator, they felt their impending doom. During this time, it has been incredibly difficult for our patients, both physically and emotionally. It is hard to imagine what it is like, never-ending days not being able to breathe, move, eat normally, or do anything for themselves. We endlessly try to keep them going, but they quickly run out of hope and energy. Some of our team have shown exceptional compassion. One anesthesiologist spent extra time with a patient who had been fighting for her life for weeks. He rubbed her feet to give her comfort and just spent time sitting and talking to her. Afraid we were going to lose her, we had to let her husband in to visit. She started to turn around and it may have saved her life. Some want to give up and ask us to let them go. They can't bear it anymore and see no future. It is a slow and grueling process, making only baby steps every day, taking weeks for real progress. However, when they get better, it refuels our hearts and we celebrate. Todd, Richard, Mary, Anna, Diane, to name a few, made it and went home. We have our own leaving parties for them now, lining the hallway in the ICU, putting a phone in a plastic bucket to amplify the music. We clap and cheer and feel real joy seeing our patients come out of their caves, prisons almost, after weeks of isolation. They cry with relief and exhaustion as they are wheeled out of the ICU, seeing our happy faces. I talked to some of them on the phone weeks later. The fear is still lurking. One patient went home with oxygen. Her tank ran out, and the supplier was stuck in a snowstorm. He arrived late at night and had to carry the tanks up the driveway. It was a frightening time for her. The fear, though, is subsiding. I hear hope and happiness in their voices, and it reminds me that I have the best job in the world. Now spring is coming. The bulbs are ready to show their faces, and we have our vaccines. But we will never forget the past year. The bond has been tight in our little hospital. We have the pictures on the walls to prove it. Memories may fade, but they will never go away. Even when we have left to go down different paths, we will always remember. We think we are strong and can cope. This is our job. But the effect of living through this pandemic and working on the front line has impacted all of us. It is under the surface, and many don't even realize it. Just a few days ago, one of our ICU doctors, brilliant, strong, stoic, recounted going home after a particularly difficult day, sitting in a chair and feeling sad. His 2 young sons noticed and ran over to comfort him. He had tears in his eyes telling his story, and is a reminder to all of us that we have suffered deep pain that will not quickly go away. We need to talk about it and remember it before we move on. The lessons we have learned will hopefully make us better, kinder, and more appreciative of our fragile world, what we have, what we need to hold on tight to, and what to let go of. We made it through because we had each other to lean on, and I am proud to be part of such a great and dedicated team of carers. In particular, extra thanks to my boss, Dr. Anne LeBrun. Anne is the backbone of our ICU and has kept us all going throughout this difficult time. With her amazing leadership, humor, and infinite ability to calm troubled waters amongst all the highly strung ICU nurses. Thank you. We could not have done it without you.
I'd like to now introduce Kim Gibowitz and Cheryl LaFontaine. And they are both nurses on North 3, where we had most of our COVID patients on a med-surg floor.
Good afternoon. As stated, Kim and I are both staff nurses on North 3, which became surprisingly the COVID unit. None of us were prepared for that, but we have both worked on that unit since before the pandemic began, and there we stayed throughout the entirety up to today. We wanted to thank Margaret Ann for asking us to be part of this celebration and reflection, and we speak to you as individuals, but also as the collective voice of the North 3 staff who have worked alongside of us throughout this pandemic. We are speaking together because that was the key element of our survival of the COVID pandemic: cooperation and support. None of us was alone, nor could we have made it through alone. All of the essential workers, our North 3 staff, Cooley Dickinson staff, and our community, we all supported one another, and that is how we made it this far. In preparation for our remarks, we asked our colleagues to take the time to reflect on their experiences and share some of their feelings and thoughts on our journey this past year. They spoke of fear and frustration that was faced on a daily basis and the losses we endured. One nurse wrote, "For the first time in my life, I had questioned my career choice, but I would not hesitate to do it all again." And another wrote, "The beginning of the COVID was terrifying. We had no idea what to expect or if we were going to contract COVID ourselves. I was so worried about bringing it home to my family. As time went on and we learned more, I began to feel more confident and supported. The teamwork on the overnight shift on North 3 has been incredible." Collectively, we've come away with a sense of pride in our accomplishments and survival. There sure were challenges, but we met them together and overcame them with the support of each other. Like Amanda said, the trust and responsibility that we're given by our patients and their families is humbling. It is a sacred thing to serve and care for one another. Our voices, our hands, and our hearts, and our endless efforts connected patients to their families and loved ones who could not be present at their bedside. We bore witness to their fight and the lives that they lived. Their recoveries were celebrated and their deaths were mourned. Some days we were filled with anxiety and faced with loss, and many of those days there was no moment of quiet or time for grieving. But we've come through this year together, and we move forward together, one shift and one day at a time. We are hopeful and can see and feel the progress that is being made in our battle with the COVID virus.
I would just like to thank all my coworkers and staff from all the departments for helping North 3 through this difficult year. In closing, I'd like to share just a few more sentiments from our colleagues. One of our nurse colleagues wrote that they were so proud of the staff on North 3. They remained calm, professional, caring, compassionate during an extremely difficult time. And one of the hospitalists that was there through the whole time was extremely helpful, wrote, "The nurses and aides are our true heroes the last year. It's been a challenging year of patient care and managing family and community fear. Thank you for all you do. I see the fight at the end of the tunnel, or the light at the end of the tunnel, I'm sorry. And it's a relief to know we can do anything." And that's from Maggie Johnson, one of our wonderful hospitalists that we have. I'd also like to thank Margaret Ann and Brian for making sure that we were safe every day throughout this year and taken care of, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to now introduce Kama Ennis, one of our physicians from the emergency department.
Thank you, Angela, and thank all of you. It is incredible to imagine that we are 1 year all the way into experiencing what has been the most disruptive health crisis that I think any of us could have ever imagined. This time last year, when the news reports that we were reading hit the front doors of Cooley Dickinson and we had our first confirmed cases, we really had no way of knowing what was going to unfold or how things would go here. I, for one, like many of us, I was reading the news obsessively, trying to find some glimmer of hope, some bit of information so that we would know what to do and have some sense of direction for how this was going to go. Those are the times that truly test the character and resilience of a person, a team, and a system. And what I saw happening in the face of that incredibly frightening situation was this team in the emergency department and teams throughout the hospital pulling together to support each other in the care of our patients. These are the times when people could turn away and protect themselves and try to feel a bit more safe. But everyone here stepped up to the challenge to support each other and our patients. People did this while making contingency plans, some even updating their wills. And these are things that no one should ever have to think about just to go to work. We made jokes to cover up the fear that we felt as we took care of the patients and our communities, but we all felt the fear. And who knew that just 1 year later, we would all be standing here, a vaccine in my arm, vaccinations in the arms of so many of us, which I encourage everyone to do if you haven't opted in yet. We have ridden through this storm together, and we have done it as a team. And that is the only way, as has been stated already, that any of us could have survived all of this. And COVID isn't gone. We're still dealing with the consequences of this pandemic, but it is incredibly encouraging, and it is an honor to be able to do this with all of you, to serve our patients and our community, and to really serve each other. Thank you.
Our challenges weren't just in the hospital. We also had our challenges that we faced with VNA and hospice, and Priscilla Ross, Executive Director, is here to talk about their challenges.
Good afternoon, everybody. I wrote this email to our staff on March 4th, which I'm a band geek, and March 4th, not only did you think of it as March, F-O-U-R-T-H, but as a band geek, you would get together and play marches at the rehearsal on March 4th, and then you would march forth out the doors. So that day has always sort of been important to me, and so I wrote this reflection for our staff, who are, 2/3 of our staff are out in the field, going out to patients' homes to visit them and their families at their homes. I did adapt it for today. We are coming up on a full year that we've been in pandemic mode. It is at once hard to believe and impossible to imagine life in any other way. It's easy to forget all that we've had to cope with during the pandemic. I remember this time last year, in anticipation of COVID hitting us, trying to think about what we needed just to keep operations going, trying to anticipate and plan for something we knew nothing about, hiding my panic and anxiety from my family, my friends, my peers, and you. Those early weeks before it hit were almost worse than when it did hit. Knowing what was happening at the time in Italy, I would look around the room at my colleagues, we were actually meeting in rooms still, and wonder how many of us will make it through. Seeing in their eyes a reflection of the worry we all felt but couldn't admit. I remember when things became all COVID all the time, exhausting long days of planning, learning, shifting, advocating, followed by long, sleepless nights of hidden worry. Learning to be okay with not knowing. Learning to accept and follow what the government, the experts, our system leaders told us. Being grateful for and feeling confidence in my colleagues and teammates at the VNA and Hospice, Cooley Dickinson Medical Group, the hospital, and at the MGB level. I remember buying out all of the 1-gallon plastic bags at Florence Hardware and all of the paper lunch sacks at Big Y so that field clinicians could use their N95s for a week at a time, then send them out for cleaning and reuse. And I remember being incredulous that we had to do this. Our staff were scattered, some seeing patients, some working from home, others redeployed to work at the hospital. Almost 1/3 of our clinicians and staff handed out masks, cleaned patient units and offices, and answered calls in employee health. Some were unable to work at all. In a blink, it all happened. And in a blink, it's a year later. We're still here. Some of us lost loved ones, neighbors, friends, patients to COVID. One of us lost a father. Our patients, grandparents, parents, children, spouses, housemates, and significant others suffered from the devastation of prolonged isolation, in particular those at the skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities. We baked, cleaned, ate, drank, relished the outdoors, became puzzle masters, knitters, bird watchers, candle makers, teachers, IT techs. We connected with family and friends in ways that we never had before. We made pods and bubbles. We got vaccinated twice. We yearned to be together with our friends, family, and coworkers, to hug, to put an arm around a hurting soul, to be in the office instead of stuck at home, alone without the support of our colleagues, to see our patients without masks and goggles, to go home without disinfecting our cars, showering before greeting our loved ones, to go to a cafe to chart, to a restaurant for our birthday. I miss life before the pandemic. I miss work before the pandemic, but I also don't. I love the slow pace of my evenings and weekends, connected with my extending family daily on an app, watching my grandnieces and nephews grow from infants to toddlers, preschoolers to kindergartners, something I never would have seen before. Learning new recipes and knowing what my siblings are eating for dinner, that my brother hurt his knee skiing because he's too old. Weighing in on the name of my nephew's new gecko, enjoying and seeking out the mundane. I knit 25 now, hats. I love not rushing over to the hospital every day for meetings. Sometimes I get to work from home with my puppies around me. Seeing you in the flesh, having meaningful interactions, because any interaction is so rare and precious, you can't let it go to waste. Seeing our team learn, adapt, be patient, lose patience, find joy, accept the sadness, support one another, be annoyed, and be kind. It has been a strange, strange year, and we still aren't out of the woods yet, but we did it. We worked really hard. We cared really hard. We changed, we morphed, and we came out on the other side better clinicians, better support and administrative staff, better leaders. Because at our very core, we are compassionate and resilient humans. We practice it every single day. We see it every single day. So much so that we don't even notice it in each other or ourselves. But I have noticed, and I'm so filled with awe and inspiration by it and by all of you. Thank you.
When I think the name Kathy Reed, I think of Jack of all trades. I don't think there's anything that Kathy can't do, and she was so involved in the operations of so many different things that went on during COVID, so it's with my pleasure that I introduce Kathy Reed.
Thank you, Angela. This year has been an emotional roller coaster for all of us. I remember when news first broke of the COVID-19 virus being detected in the U.S. At that point, I realized our country would never be the same. Surge planning started in early March. Watching Massachusetts go into lockdown and that eerie feeling of driving to work with no one on the roads. Worrying about my kids who are now adults and no longer living at home, hoping they were being safe. Worrying about keeping my 82-year-old mother safe from venturing out to perform everyday tasks like grocery shopping that had become so scary and dangerous for us all. Worrying about the person I care most about in the epicenter of COVID and hoping they were safe. Wondering how long it would be before I would be face-to-face with my family again. At Cooley, I remember looking my staff in the eye and seeing fear. The phlebotomist who knew how important their roles are in patient care, so scared, but still coming to work every day. The laboratory techs handling the first COVID specimens being sent for testing, concerned about whether there was a risk of exposure from simply handling the sample vials. The inpatient rehab staff, working together as a team to develop a schedule that provided around-the-clock coverage in the CCU, to develop a schedule that, and the North 3, to provide support to the nursing staff, to prone patients, and to provide any care and support needed during that time. The imaging staff, taking on roles in the departments like EVS, to support the effort in assuring the hospital was as clean as possible for our patients and staff by supporting a department already stretched with the heightened cleaning requirements. I remember Dr. Miettinen and her staff at CDMG mobilizing to move women's health from their on-campus location and reopening the respiratory illness clinic in a matter of days, 3, I believe, which was absolutely remarkable. Then setting up processes and training for the CDMG staff and providers who volunteered to work to support the needs of our outpatients in an effort to decompress the ED. Later in that effort, the Northampton urgent care staff and providers would join the RIC to provide care to outpatients of our community providers. In mid-March, drive-through testing was stood up at Cooley, and urgent care staff and registration staff stepped up to staff what we thought was a temporary need. Little did we know we would move the drive-through to a bigger, more permanent location behind the hospital. Once again, CDMG and urgent care staff stepped up and helped through the summer until permanent staff were put in place. These staff have worked through significant weather challenges, heat, wind, rain, snow, bitter cold, but have been there every day to provide testing for our community. And our central scheduling team stepped up to help with getting all these patients scheduled. I watched in amazement as the microbiology staff managed to bring online 2 COVID assays in our laboratory in less than a month's time. This was a breakthrough. We could finally perform testing here for our patients and employees, decreasing our turnaround time from 8 days to under an hour. Our specimen processing staff navigating changes in test codes, collection media, swab types. In some cases, these changes were happening daily, yet they persevered and to date have processed over 60,000 specimens through our laboratory. Our lab techs packaging up specimens to be sent to places like MGH, Mayo, Quest, and the Broad for testing. We struggled through significant supply chain challenges, first with collection media, then swabs, then COVID testing kits. But through it all, we managed to get results for our providers with minimal delays or disruptions. Then came the creativity of CDMG to stand up drive-through flu clinics. A whole new way of delivering health care was happening. Virtual visits became a method for treating rehab patients and urgent care patients, and CDMG, rehab, and urgent care continue to use virtual visits for patients to this day. So much of this work could not have been possible without the knowledge of Rob Levine and his team. As we started to open services back up, we recognized we needed a way to keep patients safe from our waiting areas and avoid overcrowding. The virtual waiting room through Epic became an option for CDMG practices, and the innovation of our own IT department helped deliver the Cooley Queue for our outpatients needing blood draws. This queuing system allowed our patients to wait outside of the space or in their vehicle until they are notified that it is their turn. A process to provide asymptomatic employee testing was developed in an effort to give our staff the ability to be tested for COVID whenever they needed. Finally, watching with pride as the vaccine clinics for employees came online, and then CDMG standing up vaccine clinics for their patients where hundreds of doses of vaccine are being given each week. Finally seeing hope in people's eyes. There was the innocent ask of John Slater requesting to allow his team to paint a simple thank you on the roof of the ED so that the military planes in the flyover on that sunny spring day would see the appreciation Cooley had for being on their route. Who knew that what facilities team created that day would become a symbol of all that Cooley has been through this pandemic? This has been a year of stress, of sadness and loneliness. But it has been a year of perseverance and courage. I have worked at Cooley for a lot of years, and I have to say, as challenging as this last year has been, it has also been one of the best years. Watching the resilience and bravery of our staff through the good and the bad of all that has happened, we will forever be Cooley strong. Thank you.
I don't know, in my mind, the thing I want to say is wow. Wow to everything that we have done here at Cooley Dickinson. It's absolutely amazing to hear these stories, and there's nothing that I can say here today that will complement what everybody else has said, because it is just amazing what we've done here. I want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers and those of you that were here today to share your stories, your hardship, and your thoughts. Your words and your thoughts were so much needed to be heard by everyone so that we could begin to heal. And a very special thank you to Evelyn, our former patient. We are so happy that you were here today and that you were able to share your story and your experience with all of us. I want to thank some folks who helped make this program possible today. Carla Bouchard, our respiratory therapy director, she here? Carla started off with a little idea and helped us be inspired to create this program today that I so hope that each and every one of you were able to get some small piece of something that makes you feel a little bit better about what's gone on. I want to thank Christine for all of her hard work. Where'd she go? She was over here. She moves around. There she is. For her assistance with the flyers, the banner, setting up our live stream, and even through the entire COVID pandemic, listening to me and my crazy ideas and thoughts about what I think we should do to try to keep people inspired. I also want to thank John Slater and his team for helping us with the banner behind us, and also the hearts. These were probably the size of the heart that was up on the roof when the flyby went by. So thank you to that team for helping us. I also want to thank the senior team for your support, and Estefan's leadership, and Tony and Lori, day in and day out in the command center. Those were some really tough days, but we got through it, and we even managed to laugh. Thank God for Estefan's sense of humor. So without any further ado, I'd like to present this plaque. This is a plaque that we'll keep up here in P2000. Hopefully you'll get a chance to come over and take a look at it. And basically what it says is, forever grateful. With heartfelt gratitude to all CDHC employees for your unwavering dedication during the COVID-19 pandemic. As we end this ceremony, we'd like to invite you, if you haven't done so already, to come up and put a thought, a word, something that you might feel that will help you, that you can put up on with the other hearts that are up here. And we'll be leaving this banner and the hearts up here for a while so that people can continue to do so. In closing, I want to say thank you to our community. The donations that we received throughout COVID were unbelievable. The food, the supplies, every day something was coming in, whether it was apples, cookies, or full meals. It was absolutely amazing. And to this day, the flowers that you all have here today were donated by Florence Village Flowers. Last but not least, I want to thank the healthcare team. Thank you for your continued efforts to support, care, and keep each other safe. Your dedication and commitment to the community is unwavering. I'd like to leave you with this thought and then ask that you would all join me for a moment of silence in remembrance of those that we lost. When this is over, may we never again take for granted a handshake with a stranger, the full shelves at a grocery store, conversations with neighbors, a crowded theater. May we never again take for granted a Friday night out, the taste of communion, a routine checkup, a school rush each morning, coffee with a friend, a stadium roaring. May we never again take for granted each deep breath, a boring Tuesday, or life itself. When this ends, May we find that we have become more like the people we wanted to be, we were called to be, that we hope to be. And may we stay that way better for each other because of the worst. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you so much for being here today. If you didn't get a flower, please walk around the other side here and get one. And if you would like to put your thoughts up on the hearts. And thank you again.